Joining me now is somebody who has had this experience of dealing with the aftermath of gun violence all too often in her state, and that is Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democrat from Fort Lauderdale, Broward County area. Congresswoman, good to see you.
You too, Chuck. Thank you.
All right. So first I want to get into the legislative back and forth that's coming. Obviously, you've heard what Mitch McConnell said. The fact that he said they have to pass something is him moving the ball somewhere. The question is it the Democratic House strategy to wait to see what he does, or do you pass even more bills to send to him? Or do you say, we passed our bill. If you want to pass something and we can, how a bill becomes a law, we'll go to committee and see what happens. What is the Democratic strategy here?
Well, I think the way we need to approach this is as if, let's think about how we would approach this if you had international terrorists coming into our schools, our movie theaters, our festivals, our nightclubs, and mowing people down, tens of dozens of times all across the country, nearly every week. And we had a terrorist act after on 9/11/2001, in which the entire Congress came back, the federal government mobilized. Chuck, we stood up an entire new federal agency, the Department of Homeland Security, to protect the homeland because we treated it like it was an international crisis and our homeland security was at stake. Congress's job is to make sure that whether it's domestic terrorism or international terrorism, that we keep people safe. That, to me, is job one. The House has done our job. We've sent two pieces of legislation, the Bipartisan Background Checks Act and the Expanded Background Checks Act, to the Senate. And look, I'm certainly hopeful that Mitch McConnell will do something. Sure. I don't trust what that something is. But we have a responsibility to protect people. And the gun violence madness has to be brought to an end. And as someone who spent my entire legislative career focused on passing safety legislation to keep people safe from harm that could come to them accidentally or through no fault of their own, the least we can do in an issue that draws the support of 9 out of 10 Republicans and 9 out of 10 gun owners is make sure that no one who shouldn't have a gun by law can get one and close all the loopholes. That's on Mitch McConnell. And so is the blood on his hands with every subsequent mass shooting that occurs if he refuses to pass comprehensive background check legislation.
I'm curious, what is I've never understood the argument among those that, would you be open, for instance, if the background check had a sunset clause? Like, well, can we try it for 10 years and see what happens, and then we can
we did that already.
Renegotiate? Well, you did that with the assault weapons, right? With the assault weapons ban, that's what was done, and I wonder.
And during the assault weapons ban,
I'm just asking,
remember,
what is their case for what they're afraid of with the background check bill? I don't understand the case.
Oh, the case is that they're afraid of the NRA. That's very clear. It's certainly not that they're afraid of gun owners, because 9 out of 10 gun owners support background checks. 9 out of 10 Republicans support background checks. Heck, 82% of Trump supporters support background checks. So they are cowering in the corner, fearing the wrath of the NRA. And look, what has happened throughout the time that Trump has been president, and even before that with Republicans, is that they care more about holding on to their own power than they do about making sure that they can keep people safe or do the right thing. And that is dangerous, and it's killing people. It's killing people.
Florida Republicans, enough of them buck the NRA when they did, and no one's sitting here saying but they did more than anybody expected at the time following both Parkland and Pulse. Is it because it happened back to back?
And because of the March for Our Lives kids went up to Tallahassee and spent time in the faces. Sadly, this happened, but particularly beneficial, if anything could be beneficial, is that it happened right when the legislative session was about to begin, and the legislature was in session, and they had hundreds and hundreds of kids and parents go up there, sit in the gallery, and they had no choice because they would have had to turn those kids down right in their face. And that was untenable for them.
Very quickly, you began by saying if this were an international terrorist ring breaking into our schools and shooting people up, what would the response be? Let me ask this. Should these mass shootings, should they be classified as domestic terrorism? At this point, I know in some cases they say, well, sometimes they're targeting one person and more than one person gets shot. That's not terrorism. Okay, I know there's some debate about what should these be called. At what point is it not terrorizing people?
I mean, it should be characterized as domestic terrorism, particularly when there's an obvious intent to, as in many of these shootings, the intent is to kill as many people as possible. But that's sort of besides the point, because that is determinative of how you treat the person who is the shooter. Right. We need to do what we can to put obstacles in the path of these vicious killers, which means that we need to limit their ability or prevent them from being able to get access to weapons. We need to pass my legislation, Jamie's law, that would require background checks for ammunition, which are also prohibited by federal law already, but no one checks to see whether someone can legally purchase ammunition. No ammunition, no ability to kill someone with a gun. So that has to pass. We need to limit the magazine capacity. There's so much that can be done, but at the very least, let's close all the loopholes and make sure that in any purchase situation, if you are prohibited by federal law from purchasing a gun, we do a background check so that you can't.
If you're an honest person, you shouldn't be afraid of a background check. Anyway, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Let me point out one other thing, though.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Remember, we have so many mass shootings now that the year before Parkland, if you remember, Fort Lauderdale Airport had a mass shooter that flew across the country from Alaska and killed 5 people and injured 13. And that's been all but forgotten about because we've had so many more mass shootings with so many people being killed. This is a crisis, and Congress has to deal with it.
As you just point out, we have 2 in the same county taking place less than a year apart at some point, I think.
Right.
And we have lots of counties in this country anyway.
And 2 in a weekend.
Yes. Thanks very much. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your views. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.